All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the History of Diving Museum's monthly program, Immerse Yourself. My name is Lisa Mangilia. I'm the Executive Director at the History of Diving Museum. We are located in the beautiful Florida Keys on Isla Morada, mile marker 83. If you haven't been to the museum, we welcome you, invite you down next time you're in the Keys. The exhibits in the museum store are open daily from 10 to 5. You can get more information on our website, divingmuseum.org, or on our social media, which is at Diving Museum. Again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. Let us know where you're from, how many people you have with you. If you're watching this on the recording on YouTube channel, we ask that you put comments below so we can see how you like the program and if you have any suggestions for next year's Immerse Yourself. In December, we've got some great things coming up. We're collaborating with NAUI to host Vintage Dive. It's a sea hunt style double hose regulator dive. It's going to be on December 11th and 12th down here in Isla Morada. Yael is going to go ahead and put the registration link in the chat so you can go ahead and sign up for that. We're going to be doing it in time increments throughout the day, and it'll be a lot of fun. It's going to be hosted down at Sea Base in Lower Matacumbe. And go ahead and mark your calendars for December 17th. It will be our next Immerse Yourself presentation, Diving into the Unknown, Life of a Cave Diver with Jill Heinerth. She's an author, cave diver, explorer, Women Diving Hall of Fame. We're excited to have her. But enough about what's happening in December. It's my honor tonight to introduce Tom Potts. He is the Director of Research Administration for Aquarius Reef Base. He's been with the program since relocating from St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. He's worked with the University of North Carolina. Upon graduating in 1991, he got his master's degree in science and marine biology and came down to Key Largo to work on the Aquarius Reef Laboratory and the associated science projects. He was an aquanaut in the second saturation mission of Aquarius when it was redeployed on Conch Reef. And after doing some stints with NOAA in North Carolina and Gray's Reef National Marine Sanctuary in Savannah, he came back to Florida to work with FIU and Aquarius Reef Base. So he's got also a number of science and literature publications that he's authored on manned submersibles and saturation diving. So we're real excited, Tom, to have you with us tonight. And I'm looking forward to learning more about what Aquarius is going to be doing in 2022. So welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Lisa. I think, let's see, I think this is the second time or third time I've done something with the History of Diving Museum. I always love the opportunity to talk to this group. It's always a very engaged group. And just looking at some of the folks who are on this, there are a few folks that have quite a bit of knowledge about what we do at Aquarius. So today, I wanted to sort of, I'm sorry.
Well, go ahead and put your video back on so we can see you.
Oh.
Now that we're moving, everybody wants to see your smiling face.
Okay, let's see.
We see your presentation, which is great. And we see you in, there you go. Tom's back. All right.
Okay. So do you want me to leave my video on, or should I? It's probably, it'll flow better if I don't. I'm going to stop my video just because it has the tendency to lag if I don't. All right, so I know there's going to be a number of questions. I think Lisa and Yael are going to take them in the chat box. So as you have questions, feel free to send them, and I'll try to get through this, relatively quickly in the next 30-35 minutes, so it opens up some time for discussion afterwards. We're sort of doing like 35 years of Aquarius in 35 minutes. So I have to gloss over some things, but hopefully everybody will get appreciation for what we do. Since we've done so much with Aquarius over the years, I really wanted to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about our NEMO connection. You know, while Aquarius, to be exact now, I really wanted just to highlight our partnership with NASA. So it's interesting. NASA actually began working with Aquarius back when it was in St. Croix, and they started to do some physiology type work with the aquanauts. But in 2001 really marked the start of our formal consistent partnership with NASA to use Aquarius as a space flight analog to train astronauts. And you know, the reason that NEMO is so successful is the same reason that most of our projects are successful, because it melds science, technology, development, extreme environment, mission training, education, all into like a seamless package. So, you know, to gain a full appreciation of NEMO, we really need to start with the basics of saturation diving, you know, basically how it works and how saturation diving has evolved over the years and how we got to be where we are with Aquarius. So, you know, the basic question is, you know, what is saturation diving? And in essence, it's a simple matter of physics and human physiology. So right now we're all saturated. You know, more specifically, we're saturated to 1 atmosphere absolute. That means the gas dissolved in our blood and tissues is proportional to the air pressure in the room we're sitting in. So we don't experience any kind of adverse effects until we alter that pressure. So what happens when we go underwater, you know, as we increase this pressure, more gas is dissolved into our blood and tissues. And basically what we get, the deeper a diver goes and the longer, deeper diver stays at depth, the more nitrogen and other inert gases he or she absorbs. Now, it's kind of interesting. In the 50s and 60s, a US Navy physician, Captain George Bond, asked a relatively simple question. All right, what if we just don't bring the divers up? What's going to happen? So he started to test the limits of depth and time on human physiology in what was known as Project Genesis. And basically what he found out is if we keep divers at depth, at a certain depth, over a period of time, their tissues will become saturated and they won't take up any more gas. So if you think of like a sponge in water, you can leave that sponge submerged for an unlimited amount of time and it's only going to soak up so much water. The same thing is basically happening here with our tissues. At a certain depth, we're only going to take on so much inert gas. And the real beauty of this process is, you know, no matter if a diver stays down 5 days or 50 days, you only need to decompress one time. And that really increases the amount of work that we can do on the bottom. So using the knowledge gained from, you know, Bond's Project Genesis, you know, the early explorers were now poised to put man in the sea safely, deep and long enough to enable him to do useful work. So this really started in 1962 with Edwin Link's Man in the Sea project. And it was the first open sea test of Bond's Genesis lab experiments. And right about the same time, as soon as Man in the Sea ended, Cousteau launched Conshelf, which you know, was about, geez, I think it was only about 100 miles apart from the Man in the Sea project. And this was the first time humans actually lived on the seafloor for an extended period of time. Cousteau, this led into the Conshelf 2 and the Conshelf 3 experiments. And then in 1965, Navy got into back into the saturation science game with Sea Lab 2. And it's really neat because all the way back in 1965, it was the first time we had a live radio link between aquanauts underwater and astronauts in space. But it wasn't until 1966 or so that we actually saw this evolution where an undersea lab could be dedicated to marine science, actually do something beyond engineering or a military application. And Hydrolab was probably, up until Aquarius, the most successful undersea habitat in the world. And I think it hosted over 500 aquanauts. And the cool thing about it is most of them were conducting some form of marine science. And that was a big step forward from the earlier habitats. And then this led into the Tektite 1 and Tektite 2 projects, again, continuing on that substantial university level education type interaction. And then actually, it's kind of interesting, the Tektite 2 project was the first and only mission where every aquanaut aboard was female. So we did something similar a few years back, but our habitat technicians were male, so not everybody was female on our latest mission. So as we can see, over the course of 60 years or so, there were probably 65 habitats in operation between 1962 and roughly 1975 or so. Hydrolab came online in 77, and it was ultimately replaced by Aquarius. And today, Aquarius is the only undersea laboratory dedicated to science and education, still working beneath the sea. So there's a lot of interesting questions that you can ask on, why is that? So what the neat thing is all these early iterations of undersea habitats prove that we could actually put man on the bottom and do useful work. But it's interesting, even with all the technological advances and the overwhelming need to better understand the oceans, why is it that Aquarius is, the only undersea laboratory in operation today? So to get an idea of, what Aquarius is all about, it actually relocated from St. Croix to the Port of Wilmington in North Carolina in 1990. It underwent a refurbishment process and then was redeployed in the Florida Keys on Conch Reef in 1993. So the entire program consists of a shore-based operations center and then the offshore habitat systems. The shore-based operations center is located at mile marker 86.9, 87, right by the Snake Creek Bridge. We get a number of people that actually wander in off the street, taking a look around our shore base. Curiosity gets them, and they stop in. And this operations center here is our only land-based footprint. We are about 60 miles south of main campus in Miami. And this is sort of where everything that happens at Aquarius Offshore starts and ends. It serves as, sort of this base of operation. And then just offshore of Tavernier, about 8.5 miles from the shore base here, but about a little over 5 miles from Tavernier, as the crow flies, sits the Aquarius habitat system. It sits in 60 feet. And it consists of a life support buoy that floats above Aquarius, and it houses the compressors and generators, and right below it sits Aquarius. So the onshore component, this shore-based system, has really three main parts. First is this watch desk, and everything that happens at Aquarius, be it divers, be it excursions from the habitat, be it communications, life support, everything runs through this command center. So there is always one person who has ultimate say in what happens at Aquarius, who visits, and what provisions need to be made on what kind of schedule. Then there's the ancillary part of the shore base, and that consists of a classroom where all the training takes place. We have our own dive locker compressors, and then our boats right out back. And then we also have the hyperbaric chamber, and it's used as an emergency precaution. Should anything happen with Aquarius, with the aquanauts, we have the ability with our dive medical technicians and chamber operators and supervisors to actually decompress all the aquanauts back here on shore if that need ever arose. Now offshore, we do have this 33 feet discus buoy. It floats above Aquarius in this 5-point mooring. And here's where you find the diesel generators, the air compressors, all the telecommunications equipment. And this is really the heart of Aquarius. This powers and provides all the life support things to the aquanauts aboard Aquarius. And it's attached to the lab by an umbilical. And that umbilical transfers air, power, and telecommunications. Now, Aquarius itself sits right below in about 62 feet of water. It's 43 feet long, 9 feet in diameter, and consists of a wet porch, this section right here. And that is the gateway between the dry environment and the study sites out on the reef. It also has a marine head in there. Just inside of the wet porch are 2 locks that can be independently pressurized. The entry lock contains a bathroom and most of our mission specific equipment that can also double as a science lab. And the larger section, the main lock, serves as the primary living area. It consists of a galley and bunks for 6. This is a cross section of the umbilical, which has been updated to incorporate more fiber, but in essence, this is sort of what connects Aquarius to all the life support functions at the surface. Just outside Aquarius is a gazebo, and this sort of serves as an emergency refuge. So if the atmosphere inside Aquarius ever became compromised, there needed to be a place where the aquanauts could evacuate. So they would actually leave the wet porch and all muster in this gazebo, and we would deploy safety divers, bring them back to the surface and do their decompression back here on shore. Now, since Aquarius is positive, it's an air-filled chamber, so it is slightly positive. It is anchored to a 120-ton base plate that actually sits on a sand patch at Reef. And the neat thing about this is it has these independently controlled legs, so you don't need a perfectly flat bottom to deploy Aquarius. Now, a lot of people say, what does it take to become an aquanaut? And, there are some very basic dive requirements, but, we look at our aquanaut candidates and most of them have, well over 100, 200, 300 dives under their belt. And what we're looking for are folks that are very comfortable in using scuba or hard hats sort of as a tool and not as the end all be all. So we want them to be able to accomplish their work without becoming overwhelmed with the equipment that's associated with actually working from Aquarius. All our training typically lasts 5 or 6 days. So no matter what level the divers are at, they come in and we start from the very basics, from diver physiology all the way to recompression physics to what happens in an emergency. So by the time their 5 or 6 days are up, they have a pretty good understanding of what it takes to work out of Aquarius. Now, there's 2 main advantages of saturation diving over standard scuba diving from the surface. First is this, the aquanauts are given this gift of time. So if we take a look at just an air dive down to 95 feet or even with 36% nitrox, over a course of 24 hours, you're going to be lucky to get 60 or 90 minutes of work done on the bottom. Now diving from Aquarius, from saturation, we get about 540 minutes over a 24-hour period. And that translates roughly into about a 9.5-fold increase in productivity. So I always like to ask, people, how much work could you get done in a typical day if you only had an hour to do your work? And that's sort of what we've been asking, our scientists to do, is get everything done at 100 feet in roughly an hour. And it really compromises the science. So what this does is actually gives, the aquanauts this gift of time. And the way this works is, as we dive from the surface, you're continuously making a descent and ascent down to 90 feet. And, over the course of a day, that eats up a considerable amount of time when you have to take in all the decompression limits and associated gas on your back. So it limits your productivity. So in a sense, what Aquarius is now becomes your new surface. So instead of going all the way back to a boat, your new home is at 50 feet. So when you're diving down to 90 feet, you're essentially only making a 40-foot dive. Now, while Aquarius typically limits dives to 100 feet or less, we see that, this time advantage extends for deeper study sites too. The second main advantage of using Aquarius is that everything is overseen by a proficient and professional staff. We have anywhere from 7 to 10 staff members working on a mission. And the last time we calculated, we had about 127 years of collective experience working with saturation systems and running marine science type operations. So the staff rarely is confronted with a situation where we haven't seen a situation before. The second reason is, we already talked about this 5 or 6 day rigorous aquanaut training program. So only the most proficient divers actually make it into Aquarius. And there are occasions where a diver does not make it through training. So 4 aquanauts typically go into a saturation mission, but on occasion we'll train 5 or 6 just in case medical issues or a diver washes out. We do have a backup that can take their place. For all the divers, probably the most hazardous part of any dive is getting on and off a pitching boat at the surface and then making multiple excursions, maybe down to 90 feet, and the toll that takes on your body. We eliminate most of those concerns by staying underwater and making essentially what are 40-foot dives. And finally, there are redundant systems in place. There are 2 generators, 2 compressors, telecommunications equipment. We have various ways to communicate with Aquarius. And should something ever happen with the life support buoy, there is enough onboard gas located in K cylinders just adjacent to Aquarius, where the aquanauts can easily, at a minimum, stay submerged without any contact with the surface for a minimum of 72 hours. So within 3 days, we would either have the problem resolved or have the aquanauts out of the habitat. Now, NASA has been able to capitalize on these advantages of saturation diving and to use Aquarius as a very effective analog to space operations. Since 2001, NASA has been using Aquarius as a space analog to train astronauts and develop and improve mission operations in a relatively controlled environment. And to date, since 2001 to 2021, we've conducted 24 NEMO missions. There were a few years where we didn't do any, and there were a couple years that we actually did 2 or 3 NEMO missions. 76 total crew members have been part of these NEMO missions, and of those, 56 were astronauts. and 16 of them were international, either from JAXA or the Canadian Space Agency or ESA. And the remainder were either filled by engineers, scientists, or physicians. Now, what makes Aquarius the perfect analog is right off the bat is the dimensions are comparable to the Destiny lab of the International Space Station. Both the ISS and Aquarius have a crew complement of 6 that lives, eats, sleeps, everything in constant contact with another. And another thing is that operations aren't simulated. So just like aboard the ISS, once a crew commits to a saturation mission, there's no departure without compromising the entire integrity of the entire mission. So there's 3 primary reasons outside of just the physical similarities with Destiny that make Aquarius this perfect analog. And as I said, operations aren't simulated. So crew members know that there is inherent risks associated with saturation divings, and errors have real consequences. And all the NEMO mission commanders say, there's no better way to prepare the astronauts psychologically for what they're going to encounter in space when they don't have to, sort of pretend that a mission is dangerous. It's not like flying in a flight simulator where, should you crash your aircraft, you get up, grab a Coke, and then come back to the controls and try again. So this sort of gets the aquanauts, in this different mindset. Now, since operations aren't simulated, the aquanauts go through a minimum of 5 days of intensive training so that they're thoroughly knowledgeable with every piece of dive and safety equipment that they'll use during an operation. The study site is mapped in detail so that, every piece of the operation is safe and efficient. Aquanaut candidates also spend a number of hours on the surface, and they run through a series of training exercises with every piece of mission-specific equipment. And each protocol is carefully scripted so that when they enter saturation, they are quite familiar with all the tasks that they'll be asked to carry out. They've actually walked through most of the things that they'll be asked to do underwater. Now, secondly, Aquarius has this highly developed infrastructure that includes communications, telemetry, and video. So, all operations are coordinated through the life support buoy and then controlled by the watch desk supervisor back on shore. Anywhere from 4 to 8 video cameras are operational at all times, located both inside Aquarius and on the reef. And the watch desk supervisor monitors every aspect of the op, and through this live streaming video that comes back to the console at the desk. And some of these videos actually make it to the live stream that we broadcast on the internet. This is valuable for not only just monitoring the progress and the safety of the team, but it provides a unique platform for education and outreach events that can be conducted at any time during the mission. Concurrently with the watch desk and the Aquarius staff, NASA sets up a command center at the shore base, and there they coordinate every mission specific aspect of the project. And working hand in hand with the watch desk, aquanaut activities and interactions with topside divers are coordinated to the nth degree, and this results in the risks being considerably reduced. And finally, as I mentioned, Aquarius has this highly trained support staff that is very proficient in running extreme environment missions. Typically, anybody who's worked with Aquarius in the past, you will probably find out that the majority of the people that you worked with in 2004, 2006 are still here. So we have very low turnover. As folks age out, it typically takes a junior habitat technician about 3 years to be fully up to speed and actually be able to go inside Aquarius and help run a mission. For every crew complement of 4 scientists or astronauts, there are 2 habitat technicians, and they sort of serve as this extension of the watch director. And they take care of the daily operation of Aquarius on the bottom. And even though everything is coordinated through topside, they sort of serve as, you know, the brains and the hands underwater. All our staff divers are responsible for provisioning the habitat and assisting in excursions and in ensuring the safety of all the operations. We also have staff that are dedicated to, production quality programming and being able to set up live links with school. And typically the highlight of any mission is that live link when they hook up with the ISS and the astronauts aboard the space station. So it's kind of cool when you can come home after a day of work and everybody says, "Hey, what'd you do at work today?" And I said, "You know what? We just talked to the space station." That's some pretty cool stuff. Now, the real benefit of any analog operation is the work that can be done. So, the how you get things done is really cool, but the why is really what drives NEMO and pretty much all the operations at Aquarius. And just like I would say the majority, if not all of the marine science projects that are conducted most anywhere, all the NEMO projects are multidisciplinary. It starts with, a component that looks at life sciences, from human behavior, psychology, nutrition, even expeditionary medicine. All these correlate directly to life aboard the ISS and an astronaut's time in space. The extreme environment of life undersea is as close to being in space as possible. Aquarius is also used for tracking aquanauts, autonomous vehicle, and manned rovers. Also employ a number of sensors throughout the project to get oceanographic conditions. So as a astronaut team would do on Mars or Moon or an asteroid, monitoring the environmental conditions, the aquanauts aboard Aquarius are doing the same thing with the oceanographic conditions. What was really neat is when NASA started bringing down various exercise countermeasures. I think the last time I looked, a flight to Mars was going to take roughly 6 months. So you have to figure out a way to keep these astronauts healthy and active. So it's interesting to see some of the contraptions that are deployed inside Aquarius for the aquanauts to use to sort of prepare and perfect what can be used on a long space flight. And every aspect of the aquanauts bioactivity is monitored to some degree. The various devices used to measure heart rate, CO2, sleep, to see how humans function when compromised by circadian disruptions and work overload and confinement, those types of things. Exploration, operation concepts, and robotics. It's really neat to see, a piece of equipment like this, which can actually be manipulated to simulate spacewalks at varying level of gravities, just to see how a astronaut can translate across a alien surface. Astronauts also participate in various construction tasks. Once we reach an asteroid or Mars, the infrastructure will have to be built, and to be able to do this in an alien environment actually needs quite a bit of practice. And since the initial crew complement will be limited, various robotic vehicles will need to work with the astronauts to get tasks accomplished. And how do we improve that interactivity between man and machine? It's kind of an interesting problem. And then, it's since crew complements are very limited, there's tele everything. We have this vast amount of expertise back on Earth that needs to be incorporated through various forms of telecommunications. Back in the early 2000s, we actually set up a mannequin inside Aquarius, set up the manipulators, and a physician in Canada was actually able to perform as this physician was stitching up this mannequin. They had to think in 3 dimensions, both in time and space. So now they have to think every move they make, they'll see it actually happen 20 seconds later. So it provides a unique challenge. And since space is very limited aboard the ISS and Aquarius, telementoring has been used fairly extensively over the last few years. So through using things like HoloLens or Google Glass in the early days, manuals, diagrams, drawings, study site maps, all can be projected on this, in this virtual screen. So now a person back on Earth or back on shore can walk an aquanaut through almost any procedure just by bringing a variety of different protocols. And then that aquanaut can actually work its way through the protocol without actually having something physical in front of them. Now, as you might tell, we're really proud of our partnership and with NASA, and that deals primarily, the tools are very cool, the technology is just out of this world, but it's sort of this, this engagement is really personal. So just in November, Expedition 65 ended, and 4 of the astronauts aboard the ISS were actually former NEMO aquanauts. So as we watch, different launches take place and look at videos from the ISS, you can actually say, I had a beer with Hoshi or Toma, and it's kind of neat. It sort of brings it home. And then Expedition 66, which just began about a week ago when the SpaceX Crew 3 Dragon docked at the ISS. 5 of the 6 astronauts returned, and then 2 more former NEMO aquanauts joined this Expedition 66. So it's kind of neat to see this evolution, and a number of times we'll see the same astronauts returning to the space station. And it's nice to, when you get an interview or you read an article about an astronaut, oftentimes they will mention their time during a NEMO mission as one of the coolest experiences that they were provided. So this actually, as I do these types of presentations, everybody gets sort of jazzed and, wow, this is really cool. And then it sort of drops off. And over the last few years, we really made a conscious effort of, okay, how do we sort of make Aquarius available to everybody? It is really a neat project, neat technology, but it can seem distant. And unless you can sort of personalize it and give people an opportunity to engage with the aquanauts or with Aquarius on some level, it sort of loses that personal connection. So what we've been doing over the last few years is starting to create these training programs. Just in this last year, we created what's known as the Aquarius Advanced Training Program. And these are FIU micro-credential courses. So they have some academic rigor associated with them. And they're really intended for the general public. FIU students have an opportunity to do some training with Aquarius, with scientific diving, but we never really had an opportunity to sort of kick open the doors, and all the people who are interested in Aquarius really had no way to sort of get a feel and at least a basic sense of what aquanauts go through. So this past fall, we introduced this Fundamentals of Scientific Diving program. It's actually hosted on the AUS e-learning platform, and then we'll get a number of students that actually come down in December and go through the practical, the experiential training. And when they leave here, they'll actually be certified FIU scientific divers. This spring, we'll run that same program again, and we'll also going to launch this Introduction to Saturation Diving. And this is sort of a scaled down version of what all the aquanauts go through. So over a course of about 6 or 8 weeks online, you'll get the theoretical knowledge, and then you'll have about a week here in the Keys to actually, put your hands on some of the same equipment, go inside Aquarius, run through a variety of scenarios to get a real appreciation for what it takes to be an aquanaut and what it takes to run a saturation mission. We also, since 2018, devoted a number of resources to our K12 education end of things, from all the way from Mission Inspire, which is a full curriculum toolkit that took about 9 months to develop, and it's being used here in the Florida Keys. I know it's been used in Broward and Dade County in certain schools. So this is available to teachers, and it's run through the College of Arts and Science and Education Outreach Program. They also have a variety of different things like this Aquarius Journey Lab, which are these personal interactions with aquanauts. And we actually have a program called Meet the Aquanaut, where a school can set up a visit by a former aquanaut to come in and actually spend a day in their school, engage with their students and teachers. And it sort of, personalizes this whole experience. So anybody who's followed Aquarius over the years knows that we stream all the video from Aquarius, and that's really neat, but that video is pushed. So there's no way for you to engage with us. You just sort of see what the aquanauts are doing inside Aquarius and out on the reef. But we do have time dedicated in all our saturation missions where we do conduct live links. And you can see from this map, we've conducted live links all over the world. I think we're well over 300 or 350 different institutions, schools, etc., where we aquanauts have engaged with various user groups, and it's neat. My favorite is especially is engaging with these school groups. And you want to get a kid who puts down his phone for 20 minutes, pop up an aquanaut, and let the kid ask him, how does he poop? How does he sleep? And it sort of gives them an insider perspective, and it doesn't make it seem so strange that maybe this is something that they could aspire to do. We do a number of programs with museums. I think the second one is from Lisa's place over at the Dive Museum. This was done during Cousteau's Mission 31. And we also use it to engage with policy managers, politicians, etc., sort of as a way to reiterate the importance of protecting oceanic environments, and sort of reiterating the fact that robots and autonomous vehicles and things like that are exceptional and one tool that we can use to address some of the issues, but to lose that sort of man in the sea component, I think is really short-sighted right now. So what we do is try to reiterate the importance of having man on the bottom, the ability to think and act sort of in real time in 3 dimensions on the bottom. And we're starting to see that programs migrate away from that man in the sea, and there's a variety of reasons for that. but we still firmly believe, for obvious reasons, that there is a real need to keep that capability. So, there you had it, have it pretty much in 35 minutes, Aquarius in 35 years. I know I went fairly quickly. I probably glossed over a number of things. So we can open this up to questions. I'll be happy to answer anything. There's my email address. And there's the Aquarius website. All the videos that we didn't show during the presentation, you can find them on the Aquarius site. Feel free to drop me an email. We look at, we're really open to expanding beyond just NEMO, just our formal collaboration with the U.S. Navy and their extension of saturation diving, and even beyond marine ecosystem science. We know that there are a number of different ways we could use Aquarius to sort of engage the general public and use Aquarius in unique ways that we haven't in the past. So, we're very open to discussing any possible collaborations, ideas anybody has. Of course, cost is always a factor and a consideration, but it's an opportunity to sort of think creatively and sort of tap into your inner explorer.
Thank you so much for such a condensed but really interesting presentation of 35 years of history at Aquarius. My question to start off, and then we'll get to some of the questions that people have been putting in the chat. But what was the process like of moving Aquarius between different locations? And what were some of the considerations of where it was going to be placed each time?
So it was interesting when Aquarius was relocated from St. Croix. Hurricane Hugo destroyed the infrastructure on the island, and we were approached by NOAA. It was owned and operated by NOAA, owned at the time by NOAA and operated by Fairleigh Dickinson University. Since we were part of the bigger National Undersea Research Program, our footprint extended down into the Florida Keys. So we were approached in the early 90s to think about taking over Aquarius and finding an appropriate location. So we did a number of site visits in the Caymans. I think Jamaica was considered, but ultimately the Florida Keys just made sense from a logistical standpoint, because most people, you can drive to the Florida Keys. So transporting people and gear was relatively easy. Also, since it was a federal asset, federal dollars, it made sense to keep it in US waters. So Aquarius was always designed to be a mobile habitat, but the costs involved, and not just, the financial costs, but the costs in, personnel, to ask, seasoned professionals to relocate every 3 or 4 years just wasn't feasible. We would have high turnover in staff. So once Aquarius was here, it sort of stayed. And there are a number of scientists who would like to see it move, but there are an equal number of scientists who want to see it stay, because now we have one of the longest running biological and ecological time series data from Conch Reef and the Florida Keys since the early 90s. So there's some validity to keeping it in place as this permanent station.
And we have a few different kinds of questions about decompression and how that works for saturation divers. So how does it work? How long is the process? And also, what precautions do you have for avoiding and preventing uncontrolled ascents?
Yeah, so typically the way decompression works is on the last day of the mission, divers can actually make a dive out to storage depth, just outside, as long as you stay at that depth. And typically they would be back in Aquarius by noon. They would spend a 3-hour hold period right there at the internal depth is right about 48 feet. So they would stay there until 3 o'clock. And then at that point, the hatch of Aquarius would be sealed, and then would slowly start to bring it up to surface pressure over a period of 16 hours. So gradually, the internal pressure of Aquarius over the course of it's 15 hours and 45 minutes to be exact, but throughout, from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon till about 7 o'clock the next morning, Aquarius is going very slowly from 48 feet to 0. So the aquanauts would wake up the next morning. The internal pressure would be the same as it is on the boat sitting 60 feet above their head. At that point, our safety divers would be deployed. They'd be waiting for the aquanauts in the wet porch. And when the time was right, the habitat technicians would reduce the pressure back down to ambient, 48 feet. The doors would swing open. The aquanauts would put on their scuba gear and safely ascend to the surface. So it would essentially, a 50-foot dive at that point. So there are, as the decompression protocol is carefully scripted at the surface. It's controlled inside Aquarius, but it is closely monitored by the watch desk. So every foot that Aquarius comes up is logged both internally and externally. The habitat technicians have the full capability of stopping the whole process if anybody is experiencing any type of symptoms of decompression sickness, and we can also go ahead and stop the process from the surface. So we have these redundant systems in place to sort of safeguard what happens as you bring in the habitat up from depth.
Oh, I didn't realize that they were kind of decompressing while they're still in the habitat and then ascending.
Oh yeah, that's when they get most of their Netflix watching done.
Yeah. So a question about kind of how you balance out the missions. One question is what's your mission schedule for 2022? And the other question is, how do you balance between the marine science missions and the space exploration missions that are happening?
Yeah. So up until about 2014, the lion's share of our projects were marine ecosystem science. We were still owned by NOAA at that time. So our mandate at NOAA was to sort of serve as that operational capability to do marine science. So, during a good year, 10 missions would run, 8 or 9 of those would be dedicated to marine science. As we transitioned from being a federal asset to a university-owned asset, we sort of had to expand sort of what our mission objectives were. Unfortunately, marine ecosystem science, the funding for that has dried up to a large extent to be able to afford hiring Aquarius as a platform. So a lot of our science type projects have gone by the wayside just because science R&D funding is getting harder and harder to come by. This left sort of this vacuum that NASA was more than happy to fill, and the US Navy, these large government contracts, who had the resources to go ahead and use Aquarius.
So I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. So we have a series of questions about the specifics of the dives that people are doing. What is the air mix that people are using?
Ambient. Yeah,
okay.
So we're diving standard air.
Okay.
Yep.
And what are the deepest and shallowest excursion limits while people are on Aquarius or in Aquarius?
Right. So typically we can go down. Technically, we have the protocols in place to make downward excursions down to 120 feet. We typically don't like to do that unless there is a real need to do that. And there are protocols for making upward excursions. So if you need to work a little bit shallower, but typically most of the science missions have a surface-based component. So the aquanauts have a tendency to concentrate on the deeper areas and let their surface team handle, anything above 50 feet or so, because that's relatively easy to do from just using standard scuba from the surface.
And we'll end with a question from Sally, from Dr. Sally. What is the cost to run a typical mission for Aquarius?
Yeah, so a typical mission it's about $22,000 just as an initial startup cost, and that covers all the training and provisioning of the habitat. And then it runs about ballpark about $18,000 a day. So a typical 10-day mission is somewhere in the neighborhood of 270, 300,000, and that doesn't include the science component, or that just includes running Aquarius and keeping everybody alive. So anything that people do mission related would add cost to the operational costs.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Lisa now, who's going to close us out and do some final announcements and say another kind of thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you very much, Tom. It's fascinating to me because we talk a lot about the aquanauts, and we have a lot of equipment that was used with the commercial divers that you guys use with the saturation. And anyway, it's fascinating information. So thank you very much. As a thank you, the History of Diving Museum gives you a 1-year membership. You too can come down 362 days a year and
That's
bring all of your
awesome.
friends in.
All of my
when they're
friends.
in town.
Wonderful.
So thank you very much. You were a great volunteer when we had the Wyland event and added a lot of value to what was going on there. So we appreciate you being a neighbor up in Tavernier. Actually, you're not even in Tavernier yet, but anyway,
Yeah.
So thank you. And next month is going to be diving into the unknown life of a cave diver with Jill Heinerth. She's an author, she's an explorer, also in the Women's Diving Hall of Fame, and she'll be telling us about some of her cave adventures and Into the Planet, her book, which we happen to sell in the museum store as well. So hopefully we will see you all next month. Thank you all for joining in. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, make sure that you add comments, and we look forward to seeing everybody next month. Thanks, Tom.
Great, thank you.
Okay.